It goes without saying that I love making One Piece theories and trying to convince people to see what you're seeing, even if it feels impossible. With that being said, today I'll be going down the road of no return and testing my theory ability with this video. If you click this video even after seeing the thumbnail and title, I thank you, because I know how absurd it sounds and hopefully I can keep your interest long enough to convince you. Now I'll be honest, throughout the years I've heard about the theory of Rox being Dragon, with the only evidence usually being that Rox's silhouette looks very similar to Dragon's appearance, and that's it. And I never entertained the thought because of how ridiculous it sounded. And I would agree, the silhouette of Rox does look like it could be Dragon. But if we use our brains for just a second, Rox being Dragon makes zero sense for a million different reasons. And in One Piece, you can't always rely on silhouettes. But believe it or not, this appearance evidence led me down the rabbit hole when we got to the Egghead arc in the God Valley flashback. The missing puzzle piece was Bonnie's Devil Fruit, the Age Fruit, and its distorted future ability. In chapter 1064, Bonnie uses her distorted future power on Luffy to hide from the pacifista trying to kill them. Luffy asked Bonnie why she couldn't have picked a better age to disguise him as. This was the moment that the theory light bulb went on in my head, Luffy remarking that this ability can be used as a disguise. Not only did Bonnie age Luffy up, but her distorted future power changes people's appearances to an alternate timeline of themselves. I'm sure most of you can already guess where this theory is going. I think Dragon is an alternate timeline appearance of Rox. Now I have to say this before I continue. This theory is based on a huge what if, because as of now in the story, Bonnie can only distort people's futures, not the past. And another glaring plot hole is she claims her power isn't permanent. If you click off the video now, I would understand. But if you've seen my past videos, you would know I always have answers for these kinds of plot holes, and I have way more evidence and connections between Dragon and Rox, and how this all makes sense. Alright, let's start off with talking about what we know about Rox D. Xebec. Rox was a pirate during Roger's era and was Roger's first and perhaps biggest rival. Rox amassed the strongest pirate crew to ever exist, with members that included Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Shiki, Captain John, Silver Axe, and Wang Ji, among many other infamous pirates. His home base was Hachinosu, also known as Pirate Island, and it's said that his goal was to be the king of the world. Rox and his crew came together for one big score. What that big score was, we don't know, but I will theorize on that in a bit. They were defeated at God Valley, where Rox seemingly was killed. The majority of what we learn about Rox is from chapter 957 from Sengoku. With the team up of Kaido and Big Mom, the Marines worry that it's like the return of the Rox crew. As they are discussing this, they realize there aren't many details about this once legendary crew, and Sengoku realizes not many people would know about them and decides to inform the Marines on the subject. Sengoku says the reason for this is that none of the crew got along and even want to tell the story, and that the government covered up much of their deeds. He says the Rox crew opened hostilities directly against the world government, like some kind of terrorist organization. Sengoku also gives us the reason that Garp doesn't like talking about it, which is because he had to protect the celestial dragons, who Garp hates, and had to work with a pirate to do it. That pirate, of course, was Roger himself. Both had to protect the celestials and their slaves, and with their combined forces, Garp and Roger defeated the Rox pirates. Let's stop here and analyze this. If Rox was such an evil pirate, why would the world government have to cover up many of their deeds and erase him from history? You can make an argument that maybe he was diving into Void Century knowledge and trying to find ancient weapons, but the scholars of Wahara were doing the exact same thing, and the world government made an example of them so no one would follow in the scholars' footsteps. So why did they treat Rox different? It would be another example of showing the world if you research forbidden knowledge, you will die, even if you're the strongest pirate. I think the real reason Rox went to God Valley was because of the celestial dragon's slaves. I think the deeds the world government was hiding or covering up where Rox and his crew were liberating countries and freeing people. The world government wouldn't want this to go public because it would spread and spark revolution worldwide. Doesn't this sound like someone else we know? Luffy and his crew. Oh yeah, and the more obvious answer, Dragon and the Revolutionary Army. Let's break it down even more. If the celestial dragons' lives were in danger from all the pirates on the island, their first and top priority would be saving themselves and nothing else. But why are we told the slaves had to be protected too? Why would Celestials have any concern over their slaves' lives if they're also in danger? This is the reason why I think Rox was there. Even in the flashback, he seems to have a totally different goal than the rest of his crew. Would pirates even have any reason to attack slaves? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But what does make sense to me, if the slaves are being protected because they didn't want them joining up with Rox, which is something we've seen Dragon do when he liberates countries. Usually some of the citizens or slaves will join his army. If it turns out Rox was there for the slaves, it's almost a direct one-to-one parallel to what Dragon does now. Also, another super important line is when Sengoku said they opened hostilities directly against the world government, like some kind of terrorist organization. I feel like I don't even have to explain this one, but if you didn't know Sengoku was talking about rocks here, wouldn't you think he was speaking about Dragon and the revolutionaries? That line is too spot on to be a coincidence in my opinion. So let's paint a picture of Rox's life, his goals, and the reasons he did what he did. One thing to keep in mind is when Bonnie uses distorted future on someone, that person only has their appearance and age altered. Their mind or personality stay the same, with our example of Luffy retaining his mind when the power was used on him. So Rox becoming Dragon is only an age and appearance change. They are still the same person in their mind, which is very important. Now let's begin. I think Rox's goal has always been the same. He wants to liberate the world of the world government's rule, tyrannical kings, and free slaves. Now how do you go about doing that? Well, first you need strong allies because the world government is extremely powerful with vast resources. That's where Hachinosu comes in. Rox knew he'd find the most powerful pirates on that island and build a crew, which he did. Now did Rox win them over with brute strength? That's a possibility because Kaido considered Rox as one of the strongest fighters he knew, but I don't think this is the case. I think Rox enticed his crew with treasure and fortune. I think he told them if they joined him, he'd find the biggest score the world had to offer, and it could be all theirs since he only cared about liberating oppressed people. And we have a clear example of this during the God Valley flashback. Whitebeard remarks that Rox isn't the leader or boss of him. The Rox pirates were famously known for not getting along. I think Rox was in a similar situation as Buggy, where he was the leader but only in name. Maybe he also told them he'd take the heat if anything happened, just like Crocodile and Mihawk surmise if they let Buggy be the figurehead in the Cross Guild, which I think led to Rox's demise, which I will bring up later. When Ginny broadcasted to the world about the situation they're in at God Valley, Rox would know this would be the perfect opportunity to finally get his crew to work together with the incentive of devil fruits as prizes and where Rox could attack the celestial dragons there and free all their slaves. It would be a win-win. I think the only true thing that was reported about the God Valley incident was that Rox and his crew were defeated. I think this happened because Rox and his crew had different goals at the island. Rox couldn't tell his crew he was really going there to free slaves or else they wouldn't have come. I think once they got to God Valley, Rox went straight for the Celestials and their slaves, whereas his crew went for the Devil Fruit prizes. Once his crew got what they wanted, they most likely abandoned Rox, and that's how he was defeated. Because like I said before, since Rox was the figurehead of the crew, they knew the Marines most likely wanted him the most, and figured if they abandoned him instead of fighting alongside him, they would have a chance to escape. Now this is where we get to the whole point of this video, on Rox's transition into becoming Dragon. We know there were 6 Devil Fruit prizes on this island, 2 of which were Kaido's Devil Fruit and Kuma's Devil Fruit. We don't know what the other 4 were, so one of them could have possibly been Bonnie's Age Fruit, or the previous user of Bonnie's Age Fruit could have been on the island. Now how can I be so sure of this? Well, other than Bonnie, which character has the biggest association with the Age Fruit? Saturn, and he was at the God Valley incident. Saturn was the one who gave Bonnie her Devil Fruit power. Maybe he gained this fruit as one of the prizes of the cleansing hunt. I even thought of a potential answer as to why Saturn performed this Devil Fruit experiment on Bonnie because of what happened to him in chapter 1125. In this chapter, Saturn is killed by Emu because of his failures. From what we can surmise, it looks like Emu is granting the Gorosei their powers and somehow making them immortal. What if Saturn performed this Devil Fruit experiment on Bonnie because he was looking for a way to get out of his deal with Emu, or as a backup plan? He was looking to see if Bonnie's distorted power could work on him, maybe to revert him back to before he got Emu's power, but it didn't work, and we even have an example of Bonnie trying to use her power on Saturn, but nothing happened. Maybe Saturn saw the Age Fruit's power used at God Valley, and that's how he came up with this plan to experiment with it, and maybe he transfused the Devil Fruit into her as a baby to see if it's possible to get a Devil Fruit power without having to eat one, because he literally can't eat a Devil Fruit for some reason. Maybe because he's a literal devil. And this transfusion experiment was to see if he could use that on himself. Bonnie also has multiple connections to God Valley. Her father Kuma and her mother Ginny were both there, and the only reason we even saw the God Valley flashback was because of Bonnie. She was looking at it through Kuma's memory bubble. With 2/3 of the founding members of the Revolutionary Army being there, wouldn't it make sense that Dragon was there too? Maybe it will be revealed he was there as a Marine, or maybe he was already there as Rox. When Rox was defeated at God Valley, what if a previous user of the Age Fruit used its power to save his life? But how could they achieve this? Just like how Bonnie used it to save her and the Straw Hats from the Pacifista by changing their ages, which altered their appearances. But in Rox's case, it would have been a power called Distorted Past. Since we know Distorted Future is a power Bonnie has, and we know she can de-age people to make them younger, is it too hard to believe she can combine these powers and distort someone's past? Maybe Bonnie will unlock this distorted past power because it will save Kuma. Currently in the story, Kuma seems to be pretty banged up after the Egghead incident, and we don't even know if he's still a mindless cyborg or somehow got his personality back. If Bonnie uses distorted past on him, she can distort his past before he chose to become a cyborg and bring him back to normal. Or another option, what exactly would be the Age Fruit's awakening power be? We know paramecia awakenings affect the environment, and with all the fighting going down at God Valley, what if the Age Fruit user awakened its power there? Would an entire area be populated with random aging powers that the user has no control over? What would happen to people who step into that awakened area? Maybe the awakening makes aging permanent. Looking at Aokiji and Akainu's fight at Punk Hazard, they most likely awakened, and the island was permanently changed forever. What about Enies Lobby? It's always sunny there. Was this the power of Kizaru's Fruit's awakening? I know all of these are Logias, but they're clear examples of awakenings being permanent, so maybe the Age Fruit follows suit in that regard. There's another example of this, Long Ring Longland. Somehow everything there is stretched, and it's said because everyone there feels free. Is this the power of Luffy's awakening? We can also look at a Devil Fruit power very similar to the Age Fruit, the Ripe Fruit. It was used to accelerate Momo's age up 20 years, and it was permanent. What I want you to take away from this is there's a good chance the Age Fruit can be used like how I'm theorizing. Regardless of how it happened, Rox's life would be saved because he would have been disguised by being de-aged with a different timeline's appearance. This would also be the reason that none of the surviving Rox members, or even the world government, know that Dragon is Rox. If I'm confusing you guys, let me just show you some examples from Oda himself. Oda drew all of the Straw Hats and what they would look like in a different timeline of themselves as good versions and bad ones. From Rox's silhouette, he kind of seems deranged, whereas Dragon seems more reserved and stoic. Maybe Rox was the bad timeline in a sense, and Dragon is the good timeline appearance. We don't even know how old Rox was during the God Valley incident, but we can assume he was around Roger and Garp's age, which would have put him around ages 39 to 40. The same age Shanks, Buggy, and Blackbeard are now, but I have an even more mind-blowing idea for you. Dragon would have been 17 during the God Valley incident. If Rox was de-aged into and became Dragon, then he would have been turned into a 17-year-old. But why is this important? Well, in Rox's original timeline, he chose the life of a pirate, right? And with how Distorted Future works, it basically alters your appearance if you chose or changed something that diverted your current path in life from that point forward. Think of the good and bad timelines that Oda drew of the Straw Hats. Some event would have to have happened to change their current course from the good timeline to the bad. But why is 17 important? Well, remember, this is the age that Ace and Luffy decided to choose to leave their village to become fully fledged pirates. What if this is the exact same age when Rox chose the life of a pirate? Him being changed back into that age means he didn't choose the life of a pirate yet, and he could pick a different path now. The right path for his goals. The path of a revolutionary. If Dragon was once a pirate when he was Rox, then there would be a huge callback to this already in the story. One of the biggest things we've seen Dragon do is save his son from Smoker, and then remarks and grins that Luffy chose the path of a pirate. Now maybe he's just happy that Luffy is a pirate because pirates' ideals do align a bit with revolution and freedom, but wouldn't it be crazy if we find out Dragon was Rox, arguably the most famous pirate next to Roger, and we look back at this panel. Now brace yourself for this next part, because if I haven't convinced you in the slightest yet, then this is going to sound even crazier. If Rox was this notorious pirate on Roger's level, he had to have his own version of Garp, right? I mean, Luffy has Smoker and Kobe, so who could have been Rox's Marine? Kong, maybe Sengoku? I don't think so, because wouldn't Kong or Sengoku have gone to God Valley when they heard of the news of Rox being there, just like Garp did when he heard Roger was involved? I have an even more insane idea. What if Rox's Marine was a Kainu? Why do I think this? A Kainu has some connection to Dragon. In the Marineford arc, he wanted to execute Luffy so badly because Dragon was his father. Look at all of these panels of a Kainu saying Dragon's name. You can't tell me these two don't share some kind of a past. But how can this make sense if a Kainu would have only been 17 during the God Valley incident? Well, we can solve that just like how I think Rox became Dragon. Maybe a Kainu, or whatever his name was during that time, had distorted past also happened to him. Maybe he and Rox both took the attack head on at the same time. Isn't it uncanny that both Dragon and a Kainu are the exact same age? And a Kainu's real name is Sakazuki, which means sake cup, or the ritual process of people exchanging sake cups to form family bonds, which is what Ace, Sabo, and Luffy did. Now I know Oda used the name Sakazuki because when Sabo read that name while he was staring at Ace's photo in the newspaper, Sabo finally remembered his past. But could this name go even further? Could Akainu, Rox, and Roger have performed this same sake ritual when they were younger? Is this why Akainu hates Dragon and Roger so much? Because unlike Ace, Sabo, and Luffy, what if this different version of Akainu decided to become a marine, but obviously Rox and Roger became pirates, and with Akainu's absolute justice, he couldn't forgive them? That last part is a bit out there, but I had to mention it, and another connection is his name, Sakazuki. If distorted past happened to him, maybe the Marines didn't believe him when he tried to tell them who he really was, so Sakazuki had to make a brand new identity, just like Rox did. So did he choose the name Sakazuki because of his past with Rox and Roger as a constant reminder? Possibly. Not convinced of this yet? Well, Akainu actually has a small connection in the story to Bonnie and in turn, the Age fruit. In chapter 595, we get a scene of Akainu with Bonnie, and he says, "When I heard that you had fled the government, a chill went down my spine." Why would Akainu say this? Is it because he knows how truly powerful Bonnie's devil fruit is, and that it was used to save the world's worst criminal and ruin his own life? If Akainu knows Rox is Dragon, maybe this is why he destroyed the Ohara evacuation ship, because Rox escaped during God Valley on Akainu's watch, and he will never let that happen again. This Akainu part was something fun I wanted to add, but it would bring up a plot hole that Akainu would know Dragon is Rox, and in turn, the world government. Or maybe for some reason he never told anyone and wants to bring Dragon to justice himself. And I know the obvious answer for Akainu's hatred for Dragon is because of the potential marine connection between the two of them. Now let's talk about how the world government thinks they killed Rox. A marine says they've never even heard of a place called God Valley. Sengoku replies with, because you wouldn't find it on any map. That as a matter of fact, God Valley vanished without a trace. The island the world government wanted to hide disappeared entirely. Just like how I said it doesn't make sense on why the world government erased Rox from history, if they beat Rox and his crew, why did they have to hide the island? This part also doesn't make any sense. What if Rox actually won at God Valley and freed the slaves, which resulted in the Marines having to buster call the island with Rox and the slaves still on it? In chapter 4 billion, there's a panel of the Roger pirates fleeing God Valley, and it looks like the island is being buster called. Maybe the reason Garp doesn't like talking about the God Valley incident is because he doesn't consider it a win. This could be the start of his hatred for the Celestial Dragons. What if they awarded him with a promotion and title Hero of the Marines, just like how Smoker was promoted for beating Crocodile, even though he told them it was the Straw Hats who should get the credit? Hina even says the world government would never declare that pirates saved the kingdom of Alabasta. The God Valley incident could be a similar situation to the Alabasta one. If I'm right about God Valley being buster called, there's a potential huge parallel to this in chapter 1066. Dragon and Vegapunk both visit what's left of Ohara to pay their respects. As they are catching up, Dragon tells Vegapunk what the Giants are doing and what the captain of the Giants told him. Dragon was told that Ohara gave their lives to save this asset of humanity. We can't let it be erased from history. Dragon then says it's a good thing your world government didn't figure it out and come back to destroy the books that remained. If we look at this through the lens of Dragon being Rox, it's almost like he's reliving what happened to him. God Valley was buster called just like Ohara was, and if the scholars didn't sacrifice their lives, the books would have been erased from history. Just like what happened to Rox, because he was erased from history. He even says it's a good thing the world government didn't figure it out and come back to finish the job. Almost like Rox was about to be killed or destroyed, just like the books, but since he was disguised as Dragon, the world government never figured out that he survived. After the buster call, if Rox wasn't already turned into Dragon by this point, what if a dying slave that was still there had the Age Fruit's power and changed Rox into Dragon to thank him for rescuing them and to give Rox a chance to survive with his new appearance? This slave would mirror the scholars of Ohara by sacrificing their life to save Rox because his mission of freeing slaves and defying the world government needs to live on to save the future, just like the books of Ohara. We also know slaves are force-fed devil fruit powers because of Boa and her sisters. Maybe this slave was one of the 13 super rare rabbits that were being hunted during the cleansing games, and they are considered super rare because of their devil fruit abilities. To add more evidence to this buster call theory, people think that Thriller Bark is a piece of God Valley, which it might be since God Valley was located in the West Blue, and it stated that Moria's island ship came all the way from the West Blue. and a buster call most likely wouldn't have erased the entire island completely. Maybe it broke enough to the point where a small piece of the island was left and started to float away. We even saw what could have been potential dead rocks pirates during Thriller Bark. If they died at God Valley, and Thriller Bark is a piece of it, it would make sense on how Moria got their bodies. Also, here's another indication that Thriller Bark could be God Valley. Kuma might have had to have been to certain locations before he can paw teleport himself, or others, which we see with all the past islands he visited that he later sent each Straw Hat. Now, during Thriller Bark, how did Kuma get there? Well, if it's a piece of God Valley, he's already been on that island and he would be able to paw teleport himself back. Now, after the buster call, maybe Dragon was the sole survivor and was then found by Garp or some marine ship, and they saved him thinking he was a random marine or citizen of God Valley. But now we have another glaring plot hole. How does it make sense that Garp is Dragon's father? Well, technically he could still be his father, like how Whitebeard is the father to his entire crew, or like how Luffy, Sabo, and Ace are brothers. You don't have to be blood related in One Piece to be family. While this is a convenient excuse for my theory, let's bring up another example. Roger and Garp were enemies their entire lives, but Roger entrusted Garp with protecting and looking after his unborn child. Garp also told Ace to call him Grandpa, and Garp loved Ace like he was literally his grandson. So is it impossible to believe that Garp would take a young dragon in and raise him as his son to become a powerful marine? I don't think so. You can even look at his connection with Kobe. Kobe is the ideal son and student Garp has always wanted in life. I'm sure he values him as if he were his very own son or grandson. Now you can argue what I said with the panel of Garp getting mad that his son has become a revolutionary, but like I said before, Garp could easily have valued Dragon as a literal son, or Garp is in on it and he literally can't flat out say, Rocks became Dragon and told me he was going to change his ways and become a great marine. There's another way it's possible, which is popular in the community, is that Dragon ended up marrying Garp's daughter and he became Garp's son through marriage. And lastly, another bit that could support that Dragon isn't Garp's biological son is that he looks nothing like him, and Luffy looks more like Garp than he does his own father. So you could say Luffy gets his looks from his mother's side of the family because she would be Garp's biological daughter. Now there's two ways Rocks could have pulled this off. With his brand new appearance, maybe he blended in with the slaves that were there and Garp found him and took it upon himself to train him to become a strong marine. If I'm right about Rocks not being evil and it was there to free slaves, maybe Garp is even in on it. He saw that Rocks was directly opposing the Celestials and trying to save people. If Garp knows about Rocks' transformation into becoming Dragon, he might help him, given how Garp hates his Celestials too. I know this one is more of a reach, but you never know, because look at this panel. When Garp reveals to Luffy and his crew that Dragon is his father, he says, "Your father said he saw you off at Loketown," meaning Garp and his son are still in communication with each other, which is a bit odd, given that they are on direct opposing factions. But this might be nothing because Garp loves his family regardless of affiliation, which we know because of Ace and Luffy. Now let's talk about Monkey D. Dragon. As of making this video, there are over 1127 chapters of One Piece, with Dragon only appearing in a tiny fraction of that. Dragon is Luffy's father and the son of Garp. He's the leader of the revolutionary army that directly opposes the world government and celestial dragons, and he's considered the world's worst criminal. He wants to bring down the world government, so he goes around liberating countries and freeing slaves, and because of this, he's also known as the world's most wanted man. To quote Robin, when the crew learns that Dragon is Luffy's father, she says he's a man of mystery, no one knows anything about him, which would fit perfectly if Rocks is Dragon and had a whole new identity change. We even get a reveal from Dragon that he spent time as a Marine. So can anyone make this make sense to me? Dragon was a Marine and his father is the most famous Marine of all time, but somehow no one knows anything about him. If Rocks became a brand new person, then it would make sense that this new persona would have no history behind it. And here's even more evidence on how secretive Dragon is about his life. One of his right-hand men, Ivankov, didn't even know that Dragon had a son. I know Dragon wanted to protect Luffy at all costs, so he had to disassociate himself from Luffy to protect him, but if Dragon kept a secret like that from one of his most trusted friends, what else could he be hiding? And speaking of Ivankov, he has the power to gender bend people, which if you think about it, it's like the idea of Bonnie's power changing people's ages to disguise them. And we still don't know what Crocodile's secret is, but Ivankov does. If it turns out to be true that Crocodile was once a woman and now a man, this is another great example of someone altering their appearance to become a brand new person. And as Ivankov being one of Dragon's right-hand men, this could be a huge foreshadowing on Oda's part that Dragon was once Rocks. Now let's connect both of these characters into one person. Since the distorted future ability only changes your appearance if you were to have taken a different path in life, but doesn't change your mind. Rocks' goal has never changed. When we get the full God Valley flashback and get confirmation Rocks was trying to free slaves, it's a lock for me. And if it isn't, at bare minimum, Rocks inspired Dragon to become the man he is. I think when Dragon was Rocks, he mistakenly thought becoming a pirate was the best way to oppose the world government. He needed a force strong enough to fight against them. When he created the Rocks pirates, as powerful as they were, their goals were never aligned. No one on the crew, other than him, wanted to liberate the world. They just wanted power and treasure. With Rocks having distorted past happen to him, he gets a second chance to do it all over again, and the right way. He needed to find people that had the same ideals as him. That's why he became a freedom fighter. After liberating countries here and there, he slowly started gaining followers that shared the same goal as him. Then, when he got big enough, he finally achieved the first part of his dream, creating an organization with the same ideals as him that could directly oppose the world government, the Revolutionary Army. Look at it this way: if you're a slave or citizen with a tyrannical monarch, if you saw a pirate crew like the Rocks Pirates coming to your island, would you think they are coming to save you or steal treasure? Most likely steal the treasure. Now, if you're that same slave, if you saw an army that's whole message is they are directly opposed to the world government, the same world government that deems it's okay that you can be a slave for Celestials, you would greet their arrival with open arms. We even have an example of this when Sabo fled the Holy Land and went to Lelucia. The citizens there welcomed him instantly because of who he is and what they thought he did to Cobra. And lastly, Dragon was also the character to first introduce us to the God Knights. I'm not sure if the God Knights are commonly known throughout the world, but if they aren't, it would be another connection for how Dragon knows about them since they were all at God Valley fighting him. Dragon's tattoo is easily one of the biggest mysteries in One Piece. Throughout the many years, I've seen so many takes on what his face tattoo could mean, ranging from connecting him or his family to the Shandians because they have similar face tattoos. It could be a side effect from a possible devil fruit power he has, or it could be a tattoo to honor someone's memory. While I think all of these are great and can easily still be possible, I've come up with a few more that pertain to this Rocks' dragon theory. The first one being, what if his face tattoo is a Void Century symbol? That would be a big brain move on Dragon's part since he's the world's worst criminal. The world government has to post his face in bounty posters, so if he were to put some forbidden knowledge on it, the world government gets stuck in a tough position. Not putting the most wanted man's face on bounties, or do, and hope people don't know what his tattoo means. Another option is what if Dragon had this tattoo when he was still Rocks, and now that he's Dragon, he decided to get the tattoo again to quietly tell the world government his connection to Rocks. They might not know what it fully means that he was once Rocks, but if Rocks had this tattoo, and now Dragon does, they'd be concerned. And lastly, my favorite idea is what if this face tattoo is what the 13 super rare rabbits had at God Valley? I mentioned them before, but if you don't remember what they were, when the God Valley hunt was going on, the Celestial Dragons said some slaves had different point values. There was a group of 13 super rare rabbits worth 10,000 points each. Now most slaves just had a bullseye on their backs to indicate they were part of the hunt, but that means the super rare rabbits had to have had a distinguishable feature about them to tell them apart from the other slaves, right? Well, they could have all had Dragon's face tattoo, which might have been what signified they were the super rare rabbits. Dragon would have seen these tattoos because he was Rocks at God Valley trying to help the slaves. It would be another way of him telling the world's government, I never forgot what you did that day, and his tattoo would be honoring the slaves that died that day during the God Valley hunt. Or back to what I said earlier, if one of these super rare rabbits saved his life, he got it to honor them. Dragon also had this tattoo design as a bandana or cloth on his leg long before he got it tattooed on his face. Maybe this bandana belonged to one of the slaves he tried to save at God Valley, or maybe it belonged to the slave that I theorized saved his life with the Age Fruit's power. But what's the reason Dragon got it tattooed on his face? Well, maybe Dragon's bandana got destroyed in a fight and he decided to get it tattooed on his face so that would never happen again. Maybe Akainu was the one to destroy it. This bandana could also have been Dragon's version of Luffy's straw hat, one of his most prized possessions and a symbol of his past and the lives that were massacred by the Navy and the world government at God Valley. I would also like to make one more connection with the bullseyes on the slaves' backs. At first glance, it's obviously a bullseye or target on their backs, but knowing what we know now about the Gorosei and that they are basically demons that are given power from Imu, don't these bullseyes look like Imu's eyes? The whole point of these cleansing games is for the Celestials to hunt the natives off the island so they can steal their resources. But what if this isn't the true goal of the cleansing games? What if all the slaves that are killed during the cleansing games are offerings for Imu? I wouldn't be surprised if there's some demonic ritual symbol like the ones we saw when the Gorosei teleported to Egghead on the entire island, and every time a slave was killed, their soul was offered to Imu. While we're on the subject of Dragon slowly hinting to the world government his connection to God Valley, let's talk about his name. I know there's a bunch of very unusual names in One Piece, but to me, Dragon is another clue to this being a new identity. Think about his name in the context in the world of One Piece. The people who label themselves as gods are called celestial dragons. They even have a dragon hoof as their symbol. Now, knowing this, why would Garp name his own son Dragon? Given Garp's disdain for the celestial dragons, I just find it very weird that Garp would choose this name. And it's not like Dragon's name follows any pattern with Garp and Luffy's name. If anything, it's the odd one out of these three. And that's why I think it's another clue that Dragon is a new persona. Think about it. If Rox got a second chance at life with this distorted past power, he would have to come up with a brand new name and identity. I think he picked the name Dragon to mock the celestial dragons that he absolutely hates. A low-born, common person having the name Dragon, the name that is associated with the so-called gods of this world. This must infuriate the celestial dragons. Or Dragon's name is our biggest clue to Imu's identity. Maybe I'm completely wrong about God Valley being Buster called and it was destroyed by Imu, whose real form is a dragon. When Sabo attacked Imu, Imu transformed into what looks like a dragon or salamander. This could be his yokai form. When Sabo reveals to Dragon and Ivankov the thing he saw above Leloucia, he said a great shadow covered the entire sky. Then we get a concerned reaction from Dragon, repeating the words, a great shadow? I'm not saying the thing that destroyed Leloucia was Imu, it's most likely Uranus, but what if Dragon saw Imu destroy God Valley in his dragon yokai form, and that's why he reacted the way he did to what Sabo said? Dragon also wouldn't know the thing he saw was Imu, but maybe Dragon knows this is one of the world government's biggest secrets and named himself after the dragon, to let the government know that he knows. His ship is even a dragon. There's also the Revolutionary Army's flag. I've tried to wrap my head around what this thing could be or why Dragon chose this as their symbol. Maybe this face is what Imu's dragon yokai form looks like. Now let's bring this back to the world government side. The world government actively deleted Rox and his name from history. If Blackbeard is basically this generation's Rox, then it would make sense on why they would do that. Maybe Rox was researching Void Century knowledge and that would warrant his erasure from history. But let me bring up another idea that makes absolutely no sense on the world government's part. If Rox was one of the worst criminals and broke so many taboos and ultimately met his demise at God Valley, why wouldn't the world government promote that as a win? If he was diving into Void Century knowledge, then him being killed and reporting this to the world government is exactly what the world government would want to do to make sure people don't follow in his footsteps. This is exactly what they did to Ohara. Ohara was researching Void Century knowledge and the world government was looking for any excuse to make an example of them. It's even publicly known throughout the world the reason the Oharians were eradicated. It's not something that was erased. So why is it different for Rox? Maybe it's because he somehow learned about Imu, but Blackbeard shares the same goal as Rox of wanting to be the king of the world. And as far as we know, he doesn't know about Imu yet. I actually don't think he was trying to be the king of the world. I think these potential parallels to Blackbeard are meant to throw us off. I think the narrative that he was trying to be the king of the world was to ruin his reputation with the public. If the world government labeled him this way, then Rox actively trying to liberate people would be way harder if citizens and slaves thought he was just another tyrant. I think this is what the world government wanted to happen to stop his positive influence on the world. Even if Rox wasn't researching forbidden knowledge, him being killed should have been in the news and actively promoted as a win like they did with Roger's execution. If Rox was the super bad guy and he was the leader of the strongest pirate crew to ever exist, then the world government should use that as the biggest deterrent ever for pirates. The world government could say, if the strongest pirate crew in the world couldn't stand against us, what makes you think you have a chance? Instead, they decide to erase Rox from history, which to me sounds like Rox could have been a martyr if details about his death got out, which is why they never did, and he was erased. That's why I think Rox was freeing slaves and trying to liberate countries. Those were the taboos he was doing. This would be the reason as to why the world government would try and delete his existence from history, because they didn't want anyone joining him or repeating what he was doing. Then they would have a full-blown revolution, which is kind of what we are gearing towards in the story currently. Think about all the times the world government has tried to cover up the things Luffy and his crew have done. Luffy has liberated countries, defeated warlords, and saved countless lives. But the world government paints him as one of the worst criminals to ever exist. This could easily be the same exact thing they did to Rox. Label him this super bad criminal so people don't know how much of a good guy he is and give people hope that someone is going around freeing them. The world government would lose all their control of the world. Look at the current arc. Vegapunk wanted to be saved by Luffy and his crew, but the news reported that Luffy kidnapped Vegapunk. Or look at when Kuma liberated his country from an evil king. They labeled him the tyrant. And since the world government somewhat controls the news, that's what most people think of Kuma. Jinbei even shows us this. And just like what I said about how Ivankov and his powers of gender bending can be used as a disguise, Dragon's other right-hand man portrays the other half of Dragon and Rox, which are the false narratives made up by the world government and news. So Dragon's founding members, or his own version of Luffy's wings, represent and foreshadow his new identity. That's why all the things we hear about rocks was from Sengoku. It's meant to skew your view of rocks. Why would you take anything the world government has to say at face value when they constantly lie about anything that threatens their power? Again, think of Luffy and his deeds. The main takeaway from this is, you shouldn't believe anything the world government has to say, especially about people that directly oppose them. They're masters at twisting the news and views of people. It's one reason why they have stayed in power for so long. Look how most normal characters in One Piece blindly listen to anything the government says without question, like the non-scholars of Ohara. As soon as CP9 said the Ohara scholars were trying to destroy the world, just researching Void Century knowledge, the regular Oharian citizens instantly believed it and turned on them. They wouldn't even let an innocent child board their evacuation ship. The fact that Oda even inserted the line, according to the news reports, should be a huge red flag. Just look at who runs the news, Big News Morgans, and we see he clearly writes whatever narrative he wants, sometimes in benefit to the world government. Look at chapter 1096. When Kuma, Ivankov, and Ginny flee God Valley to Sorbet Kingdom, Iva says the only news story is the legend of Garp's heroics. They won't print anything else, just what the powerful want. This Morgan's writer is such a hack. We still have no idea what happened on that island. This news coverage of the God Valley incident could have been Morgan's big break and his first time twisting the narrative to benefit the world government. Now, if it turns out to be true that Rox is Dragon, let's take a look at the story through that lens. This would mean Rox is Luffy's father, and if Luffy's mother was a Monkey D, this would make Luffy have two D-clan parents, which might be important. Ace had two D-clan parents, and Roger knew the true history of the world and was convinced his son was going to be the man the world was waiting for. So maybe there's some connection of the man everyone is waiting for having two D-clan parents. This would also mean that Ace and Luffy's fathers were both rivals in the same era, and there's a cool pattern between Luffy, Ace, and Blackbeard and their fathers. Luffy's idol and role model was Roger, who was Ace's father. Ace's role model was Whitebeard, who was technically Blackbeard's father before he was Ace's. And lastly, if Rox is Luffy's father, that might be who Blackbeard looks up to as a role model, since we know his ship is called the Saber of Xebec. And in my theory video about Blackbeard's bloodline, I theorized that Rox is Blackbeard's father, which could still be true because Rox lived a full life before he would become Dragon. So he could have still had Blackbeard, then had Luffy later when he was Dragon, making Luffy and Blackbeard half-brothers, which would be an insane twist. Maybe Blackbeard was what was stolen from Hachinosu and Rox thought he was killed, which might be why Dragon is so protective over Luffy. He doesn't want the same thing to happen to another son. Luffy and Blackbeard are two sides of the same coin. I think it would be a cool dynamic that Blackbeard is the evil son of Rox, while Luffy is the good son. Blackbeard would think he's the destined one that the world has been waiting for, but it's Luffy. And if Rox was the bad timeline appearance of Dragon, it would fit that he had an evil son like Blackbeard, and then had a good son like Luffy when he was the good timeline version. Maybe the way Blackbeard knows about Rox is because Rox left him a message recorded with a tone dial telling him he was destined to be the one to change the world. Somehow Rox would know his son would be the one to do this, just like Roger saying the same thing about his son, but Rox not knowing he would have multiple sons, and the prophecy was actually referring to Luffy, not Blackbeard. So Blackbeard is basically everything opposite of Luffy. If we take a look at Rox's wiki, it said his character may be based on the real-life pirate Roche Brasiliano, which translates to Rock the Brazilian, who also disappeared mysteriously like his One Piece counterpart. The big connection I want to make here is if Rox is based on this real-life pirate, Rox the Brazilian, who, let me check my notes here, was Brazilian, this could be one of the biggest connections for Rox being Dragon, who in turn is Luffy's father, because Oda said Luffy's real-life nationality would be Brazilian. Dragon also was in attendance at Roger's execution, but why would Dragon want to attend? Maybe Roger was one of Dragon's influences in his life and wanted to pay his respects to the man who defied the world government. Or if Dragon was Rox, he went to the execution because he's saying goodbye to an old friend and rival. Shiki was one of Roger's rivals and he had huge respect for Roger, and I'm sure he'd want to be there too if he wasn't already in prison. Since we know Haki can counter and cancel out Devil Fruit powers, with our example of Law being turned into a woman by Doc Q and then turning himself back into a man by exerting his Haki, what if a reason we haven't seen Dragon fight anyone or try to save Ginny or any of his friends is because he can't use his Haki? Because if distorted past happened to him, what if the moment he exerts his Haki, the effects of distorted past wear off and revert him back to his Rox appearance, and Dragon is waiting for the ideal time to reveal himself as Rox? Who knows, this could be our answer for Dragon's tattoo. Maybe he somehow sealed his Haki away, resulting in the tattoo on his face like how Joy Boy sealed his Haki into the Iron Giant. And lastly, Dragon hasn't really done much of anything in the story, with the majority of the fandom calling him a fraud. Now obviously Oda is saving him for the endgame, since the Revolutionary Army will most likely be playing a big role in the final arc. But wouldn't it be crazy if the reason Oda hasn't shown Dragon doing much is because he's saving this big rocks reveal and twist? I think that would instantly make people forget everything bad they said about Dragon, and he would become one of the most hyped characters from here on out. That's all I have for this theory, and if you made it this far, thank you, because I know this was a really long video, and I would love to know what you guys think. Did I convince you in the slightest that there's a chance Rocks is Dragon? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for future One Piece theories. See you later, guys.